Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between. Welcome back to another Old Man Rambles. I am hoping this is the last political um, video that I make for a while, although I fear it might not be the case. Although this is only tangentially related to politics. Um, I mentioned in one of my last videos about my concerns about the election that I was, stating some facts to people and they were just telling me I'm lying, that I'm a liar. And reading some other people's posts on things and you know, watching people or, looking at the comment sections, seeing people spout easily disproven things. And I'm kind of going back and thinking about the way things used to be. And again, because of some things other people have said, rolling back the clock to my childhood and, early teens, early adulthood, and how we got our news. Now, growing up, and for most of the era of broadcast history, there really wasn't a lot of news on television. You basically had the 5 o'clock news, which was local news, and the 6 o'clock news, which was the national news. So local news stations and the big broadcast news. And you had ABC, NBC, and CBS. So you basically had three different channels reporting on the local news and the national news and the global news. And they all pretty much said the same thing with slight variations. And then there's also newspapers. So, there was, again, local newspapers, maybe city, county, or state, sometimes all three. And you had like the big national newspapers like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. So there were, a handful of places that you got the news. But it was all, and while they all did compete, they weren't big business. And that's not to say that they didn't make a profit or didn't make any money, especially the major newspapers, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Print news was certainly profit driven to a certain degree, but there was more serious journalism. Most of the rags that were in it solely for the profit were rags. The tabloids and things like that. They existed, but they weren't really respected, and most people who knew about them knew they were garbage. But if you wanted to be informed, you watch the local news, you watch the broadcast news, and you might have read a couple of big newspapers. And the benefit of that was that everyone who wanted to be part of the conversation started with the same basic group of facts. We might have disagreed on what those facts meant or how we felt about those facts, but we all started from the same point of origin. We all had the same facts at our disposal. That's not to say that the news is always accurate, that the news didn't occasionally fudge the details, but the news stations, the news papers knew that by being accurate as they could be, they had a better chance of getting your attention, getting your views, getting your subscriptions to the paper, that sort of thing. I had something else I want to say. It just fell out of my head. Oh, that's what it was. One thing most people don't know about television news in the early days, before the current era, before the 2000s, was that the television broadcast news wasn't profitable. The news stations that put them out knew they would lose money. The 5 o'clock news and 6 o'clock news maybe broke even, maybe made a tiny bit of profit, but it was regularly accepted that they were going to either lose money or virtually not make any. The broadcast stations put them out there as a public service. So what changed? To start off with, 60 Minutes. I know it's not something a lot of you would have expected, um, especially since 60 Minutes is a well-respected um, bit of television journalism. You know, we all watched it when it first came out in the air. It was interesting. It was in depth. You know, they gave us something that we hadn't seen before. They gave us long form journalism stories, as opposed to the nightly news where they had to try and cram everything into like 15 minutes to, half an hour or so. And all the topics, they basically took like one to three topics, broke up into like 20-minute half-hour segments or a full hour, depending on how many topics they were going to cover. This was in-depth journalism on a small number of topics. And America tuned in. We all watched it. And the reason that was a problem was because the big networks suddenly realized that news could be profitable. They realized that they didn't have to lose money with the nightly news if they could maybe change things up a little bit. Now, things didn't change right away, of course, but it gave them the idea that maybe they could make money off the news. The next thing that happened was Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter and those types of things on talk radio. Now, the problem with those people, aside from the problem with those people spouting nonsense, was that they made a lot of money. And they made a lot of money not by telling people the truth, but by telling them a highly edited version of the truth, or sometimes outright lies. And people tuned in droves. It made huge amounts of money. It made Rush Limbaugh a millionaire. It made him a national figure. It made him feel important. And people listened to him. And believed him, which was worse. But, again, it gave the networks the idea that you didn't really have to tell people the truth to make money. You could lie to their faces, and they'd eat it up if it told them what they wanted to hear. And of course, then 9/11 happened, and we had cable networks 24-hour news, which then meant they needed to feed the beast. They needed to make money. They needed to make a profit. They needed to tell people what they wanted to hear. They had to make it interesting to keep people looking at the screens. And we all complained about it, but, the networks kept on churning. And then there was the internet with the algorithms, which curates your news for you. And man, it's hard to escape. I've noticed just in the last few days, not even news related. Like I was on YouTube and I watched like a movie clip. Nothing important about that. But then I started getting other movie clips in the feed. And it started to be specific types of movie clips of certain, types of narratives. And all I did was watch like a single movie clip. And I actually had to work hard to get those out of my feed. I actually had to go through like my YouTube favorites list and just punch them continuously to clean out that freaking algorithm feed. They are so intent on, they see you look at one thing and they'll just pump it in your eyeballs as fast as they can. And people get into these little echo chambers. People aren't moving outside of them. And I see so many people commenting online things that are so easily disproven and just factually wrong. And regardless of which political candidate you're going to vote for, or maybe have voted for because early voting has already happened, there are valid criticisms of Kamala Harris. I can come up with a few on my own. There are valid criticisms of Donald Trump. I could come up with several, off the top of my head, both of, it doesn't matter. I need to go out. Didn't need to go off on a tangent about that. um, but I've also seen like blatant misinformation about both candidates from both sides. I've seen people say things about Donald Trump that just aren't true. Both criticisms and supposed truths. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump because I know because this is the kind of person he is. It's like, no, he specifically said the exact opposite of that. This makes no sense, kind of thing. If you're going to support Donald Trump, then maybe do some research. I don't know. You're voting for him, for something he has said the exact opposite of. It's like, how can you not know the truth? And again, the same thing about criticisms of Kamala Harris. If you're going to demonize her or praise her, stick to the facts. How are we in these such tiny little news bubbles? And I can be as guilty of it as the next person. I try not to be. I try to stick to the facts. When I see something that just seems incredulous to me, I do take the time. I try and find a source. And I guess that's the part of the problem. I try and find a source I can trust. There are certain news organizations that I will not listen to because I know they have no interest in telling me the truth. And also because I know the minute I click on them, the algorithm is going to feed me a ton of it. So there are certain things I will avoid. But yeah, I'll go and try and find which news sources are the least biased. And then but I mean, do people not do that? They must not be doing that. They must just be listening to, I don't know who they're listening to. But I mean, I do think this election is important. And I do think people need to pay attention and find the truth. And not just a subjective truth, not just my opinion of the truth, the actual facts, the actual things these candidates have said, the actual things they have actually done, the actual things they say they have said in the past and done in the past, and not hyperbole, not exaggerating, not taking things out of context. What actually happened, what was actually said, what was actually done, what have they said they're going to do? No editing, no cherry picking facts, no exaggerations, bare bones. We should be able to agree on these things. And we're not. Because we're stuck in our own little information bubbles, or so many of us are stuck in our little information bubbles, and we refuse to accept anything that comes outside that bubble. And it's screwing us over. And I worry what's going to happen on election day, because people aren't, I don't know. I've ranted enough. Good hunting.